All right. So we are continuing with assignment 1. We just got introduced to it in the last minutes of last class. So just a really quick review. We are working on Unit 4. Unit 4 has Question of the Day 1, which we'll be discussing. I think we'll probably discuss it next class. And Assignment 1, our fantasy landscape composite. So the question of the day is about digital art versus traditional art, advantages and disadvantages that we know of right now with whatever experience we have. You want to answer with more than 100 words to inform our discussion. Here are some past examples. We are compositing using other people's pixels to create our own original fantasy landscapes, whether they look like something that could be photographed or something that exists in a totally different reality, right? You can interpret fantasy the way you want. Maybe your version of fantasy is it's San Antonio 10 minutes from now, right? But you'll still have to construct it and make your own composition. How do we make it original, even though we're using other people's pixels? Well, we start with a planning sketch where we define what the foreground, middle ground, and background is, and what the overall aspect ratio and composition is of the scene. And then we use the reference images to layer it up and try to create that illusion of depth, foreground, middle ground, background. We can have man-made structures in it, though they're a little bit less manipulable because they have to match linear perspective if they're man-made. Organic ones are easier to make work. So for instance, with skyscrapers, you can't really make those leaning unless you want them leaning, right? Everything has to be kind of vertical on a ground plane. But with these cacti, I can make those leaning and I can change their size because they're organic. They don't have to fit in linear perspective. The first thing when you're doing something that's for your portfolio and based on your own original composition, that's the requirement, you want to, even before you start looking for reference, think of what your theme is. You want to have a direction in mind. So, though there's lots of inspiration you can look at, like I pointed out a lot of cartoons, I think it's really helpful just to set your theme first. So my theme, I'm just using it from what I was using for my exercises, the idea of Greek mythology. So I was thinking it would be cool to try to do my version of Mount Olympus, right? This fantasy location, this city up high in cloudy mountains, right? We have floating islands, we have fields for horses, we have the Feywild, lots and lots of nice examples. What we don't want is to have people or animals or what is called figurative content in our backgrounds, in our landscape setting, because our next assignment will be creating figurative content. We'll be creating a creature that we will then put into our landscape. All right, but don't let that limit what you do for your landscape. You know, don't say, "Oh, I want to make a scorpion, so I have to make a desert." Right? We're going to learn how to make them match no matter what. So I chose Mount Olympus. So then my first task was to start thinking about inspiration and reference. And some inspiration I like to pull from animation backgrounds. So I could look at Mount Olympus animated background, maybe from the Disney movie Hercules, right? Or from the God of War video games, or the Little Mermaid kind of castle under the sea is kind of based on Mount Olympus. So there's lots of them. And the good ones, even though these are just stock low resolution images, but because they're animated, animation is very good at thinking about foreground, middle ground, background, so that you can activate that setting with characters. So we have immediate foreground here, we have middle ground here showing the temple and the mountain, and then we have far background. So very clear 3 layers of depth, like we talked about last class. This one, also, even though it's just a temple, immediate foreground with the tree, middle ground, background. 3 distinct layers of depth. This one, not so great, right? Even though this is often what students will draw their first time, trying to envision a fantasy landscape. Why is it not so great? Well, because do I have 3 layers of depth? Not really. I've got foreground, I've got background, right? That city is kind of just in the background with the sky. There's nothing overlapping it or showing me what's in front of anything else. So is it that the city's in the background, or is it that the city's kind of small and floating amidst the clouds with just a vague nothingness behind it? That's why this one isn't great. It's also centrally based, right? It's called a central symmetrical design, where everything's in the center and then everything's balanced off of that. And that doesn't do the best to kind of lead the eye back in the space. So that's why finding inspiration can often help. This is just a different color of the same shot, right? Whereas this one, it zigzags. It uses not horizontals and verticals, but it uses diagonals. And you have foreground overlapping with the middle ground, overlapping with the background. So that's a little bit more dynamic. This one too, zigzags. Foreground, middle ground, background. This one is just foreground on a background, right? So not as helpful as these kind of inspirations. This is one from video games. I guess this is Fortnite. And you can see, really helps to have that foreground element, right? It could use a little bit more of the far background. That's the problem with screen grabs. It's not always well composed. Even just this cloud in the immediate foreground helps sell this illusion. So there's lots of inspiration, but none of these images are actually going to be reference images. These are just inspirations. They get me thinking about what should I search for. So then I start searching. And if I use Google Images, just beware, and I look up Mount Olympus, right, I'm going to get pictures of Mount Olympus, hiking in Greece, which is not the most impressive mountain. It's definitely not what the animation kind of shows. And the other problem is I'm going to get like YouTube stills, and I'm going to get images, some of which are pretty big, like this one, but some of which are pretty tiny, though a lot of these are pretty large. People are pretty generous with their landscape photos. But like this one is only 630 pixels by 1200 pixels, right? And we want to, in order to print these at least 8 by 10 by 300 pixels per inch, which is minimum print resolution, we want these to be at least 1,000 pixels in both dimensions. So how do we improve our Google results? So I can think, well, what is this mountaintop going to actually look like? I'm going to go to Tools. I'm going to go to Size. I'm going to look at only large images. And then I have a problem of sometimes they'll have stuff on them that I don't want. Right? So when I find an image and it's over 1,000 in both dimensions like this one is, and I think I might be able to use it, I right click and I say Open Image in New Tab. And then I want to see it full size, and it needs to be bigger than the screen for me to use it. And this actually is pretty cool. It's not really the vision I had. But this would be usable reference. I don't see any watermarks. I don't see any noticeable digital distortion in it, which comes from when they forced an image to be bigger than it should be. All right, the other problem is I get millions of results for Mount Olympus, and none of them are really what I'm thinking. But I might find something that's helpful, like these rocks as the foreground. So I might open that image in a new tab. And if I check it, oh, it's got these people in it. I have to get rid of those people, but those rocks are kind of cool. So maybe I'll save it. It's just slightly bigger than the screen, so it's just barely works, right? And so I'll save it. And then a lot of these are going to be kind of useless because of watermarks, right? Because of things like them being wallpaper screens that they want to sell you, whatever it might be. So always look at them full size. This one isn't actually big enough, even though it says it's larger than that. You need it to be over 1,000 pixels in both dimensions. So what is a better site for reference for landscape photos? Pixabay. Pixabay, if I look up Olympus, and I'll see pictures of, Mount Olympus, the mountain, but I'll also see ones kind of generally tagged with that. And I'll see some that look too good to be true. And what's nice is Pixabay will label them, right? So this is a photo. This shows kind of that same mountain range where Mount Olympus is. Maybe that's interesting to me. Then I see this one which looks too good to be true. And what's nice about Pixabay is they will tell you when content that's donated is AI generated. So I give you this. There are ways to use AI very effectively for concept work. In fact, it's probably the place where AI has most immediately changed the industry in concept designs. But not because AI does it better. It's just because AI can make variations faster. But when we're trying to make a really nice, believable landscape, if we start using AI attributes, you'll notice that those pixels don't match photographic attributes. Because this is more like digital painting. Even if you tell it, be really realistic, make it look like a Nikon, whatever you say as a prompt, AI cannot create digital noise within the pixels like a real digital photo that grabs information does. So when you zoom in, you see purple pixels, you see green pixels, you see yellow pixels, but when you zoom out far enough, it's making a gray rock, right? AI will just do that with gray pixels because it's way more efficient. So no matter how good this looks, even though we would be collaging with it, and AI pixels are other people's pixels just like other people's pixels are other people's pixels, beware of AI content. I'm not saying you can't use it to composite with, but its pixels are not going to have the same quality as photographic reference that you find. Does that make sense? All right. And that's why I'm not going to model using any AI for this project. I've played around with using it in the ideation phase before, but honestly, it just kind of wastes time. So I'm going to grab this one. With Pixabay, you just go to download, and because I'm signed in, I can pick the very largest, but even the second to the largest, which you can download without signing in, is still larger than 1,000 pixels in both dimensions. Okay, so now you can see I want to get more specific because I'm getting off of architectural stuff. I'm getting like Olympus cameras, I'm getting lots of Greek mythology, and there's 3 pages of this. So now I got to think, what are the components I want in my landscape? So I want rocky mountains. And it's going to give me thousands of results because it's not giving me results that have all 4 of these tags. It's giving me results that have all 4 of these tags and all the results that have that tag and all the results that have that tag and all the results that have that tag and all the results that have that tag. So it gives me a lot, but that is really useful here because I love this and I wouldn't have known to search for this. Like this little natural outcrop with this architecture on top of it, which is beautiful, which is perfect for kind of the scale of what I want. So I say download. That'd be a good foreground element for what I'm going for. And I'm opening them in new tabs so I can just kind of download them and then look at what I have and then sketch a vision. And then this rock is pretty powerful. I can make that a distant mountain. That's Yosemite. That's a little too recognizable. Let's see. These rocks are pretty cool. They look fantasy-like. There's another little structure there and a little tower. Pretty interesting. And these are all curated, right? Human beings have looked at these and have checked their pixel quality and their size. So I don't need to worry about it like I do from Google Images. And they're all Creative Commons open. So even without altering them, I am free to use them, even for commercial purposes. Then there's this one. These high winter mountains that are already cut out to be a compositing element. That could be fun to play with. And on and on. And I have 1,700 pages to go through. But that doesn't make the most sense, right?